respectfully. Thank you for taking your seats, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen.
Nobody is listening to me.
I know. So rude.
Oi, Pedro. Eu tô no canal 1 de inglês.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for taking your seats. This summit
is going to start in 2 minutes.
The summit is starting. The Secretary General would like to speak. Thank you for taking your seats, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this crucial summit on climate change. My name is Melissa Fleming. I am very honored to moderate this important summit. And with no further ado, I would like to introduce the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, to start us off.
Excellencies, friends, I'm starting by apologizing for the fact I will not be able to stay until the end, but someone has scheduled the Security Council summit meeting for today at 11, after the summit had been scheduled. And according to the rules, I have to be in the Security Council. So my apologies. But the fact that I will be leaving before the session ends does not mean that I do not consider this an absolute priority in our work this week. Our focus here is on climate solutions, and our task is urgent. Humanity has opened the gates of hell. Horrendous heat is having horrendous effects. Distraught farmers watching crops carried away by floods, sweltering temperatures spawning disease, and thousands fleeing in fear as historic fires rage. Climate action is dwarfed by the scale of the challenge. If nothing changes, we are heading towards a 2.8-degree temperature rise, towards a dangerous and unstable world. But the future is not fixed. It is for leaders like you to write it. We can still limit the rise in global temperature to 1.5 degrees. We can still build a world of clean air, green jobs, and affordable clean power for all. The path forward is clear. It has been forged by fighters and trailblazers, some of whom are with us today. Activists refusing to be silenced. Indigenous peoples defending their lands from climate extremes. Chief executives transforming their business models and financiers funding a just transition. Mayors moving towards a zero-carbon future, and governments working to stamp out fossil fuels and protect vulnerable communities. But if we are to meet the 1.5-degree limit and protect ourselves from climate extremes, climate champions, particularly in the developing world, need solidarity. They need support, and they need global leaders to take action. Action to reduce emissions. The move from fossil fuels to renewables is happening, but we are decades behind. We must make up time lost to foot dragging, arm twisting, and the naked greed of entrenched interests raking in billions from fossil fuels. The proposed Climate Solidarity Pact calls on major emitters who have benefited most from fossil fuels to make extra efforts to cut emissions, and on wealthy countries to supporting emerging economies to do so. And the acceleration agenda I have proposed calls on governments to eat fast forward. so that developed countries reach net zero as close as possible to 2040 and emerging economies as close as possible to 2050, according to the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. And it also urges countries to implement a fair, equitable and just energy transition while providing affordable electricity to all. By ensuring credible plans to exit coal by 2030 for OECD countries and 2040 for the rest of the world. By ending fossil fuel subsidies, which the IMF estimates reached an incredible $7 trillion in 2022, and by setting ambitious renewable energy goals in line with 1.5-degree limit. The acceleration agenda also calls for climate justice. Many of the poorest nations have every right to be angry. Angry that they are suffering most from a climate crisis they did nothing to create. Angry that promised finance has not materialized, and angry that their borrowing costs are sky high. We need a transformation to rebuild trust. Excellence.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, governments must push the global financial system towards supporting climate action, and that means putting a price on carbon and overhauling the business models of multilateral development banks so that they leverage far more private finance at reasonable cost to developing countries. All parties must operationalize the loss and damage fund at COP28. Developed countries must meet the $100 billion commitment, replenish the Green Climate Fund, and double adaptation funding. And everyone must be covered by an early warning system by 2027 by implementing the action plan we launched last year. At the same time, the acceleration agenda calls for business and financial institutions to embark on true net zero pathways. Shady pledges have betrayed the public trust. Some companies have even tried to block the transition to net zero, using wealth and influence to delay, distract, and deceive. And this is shameful. Every company that truly means business must create just transition plans that credibly cut emissions and deliver climate justice in line with the recommendations of my high-level expert group. Excellencies, friends, the future of humanity is in your hands, is in our hands. One summit will not change the world, but today can be a powerful moment to generate momentum we can build on over the coming months, and in particular at the COP. We can and we must turn up the tempo, turn plans into action, and turn the tide. I thank you.
Secretary General, and the Secretary General has just laid out the major elements of his acceleration agenda to safeguard the 1.5-degree temperature goal and to deliver climate justice. But today we are here to hear from the first movers and doers, those being first to begin alignment with this ambitious but necessary acceleration agenda. So before we delve in, I would like to remind leaders of the format of this discussion. We ask that the interventions are no more than 3 minutes long. I would like to also note that our next speaker was to be His Excellency Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, the President of Brazil, but he has unfortunately fallen ill. His Minister of Environment will address this meeting at the end of this first session. Now I'd like to welcome His Excellency William Ruto, President of Kenya. Mr. President, you just hosted the Africa Climate Action Summit, and you are taking your country, Kenya, out of fossil fuels. Could you please share your vision on ensuring that Africa is an equal partner in a just and equitable transition?
Thank you very much. I will use this, I don't know, is that audible?
It's working.
Okay, thank you. I will use this opportunity to reflect briefly on the Nairobi Declaration, which is the principal output of the successful Africa Climate Summit, which took place a fortnight ago, and its fresh perspective, which frames economic growth and climate action as simultaneous and complementary, not sequential and mutually exclusive strategies. Africa is a young continent with a median age of 19 and the home of the world's youngest and fastest growing workforce of highly skilled and immensely motivated men and women hungry for opportunity. Africa possesses abundant renewable energy potential. Africa holds 2/3 of the world's remaining unutilized arable land. Africa owns 30% of the world's critical mineral reserves, and Africa's natural assets, from vast mangrove, peatlands, forests, form a significant proportion of the Earth's last remaining lungs and critical habitats for biodiversity. Africa's vast resources and our people's spirit of enterprise constitute a potential that can be activated through investment to unlock African prosperity and clean, green global manufacturing. Our low emission profile is a singular advantage in that, unlike other regions, Africa has no need to choose between satisfying new demand and decarbonizing existing capacity, because our existing capacity is very low. We can leapfrog straight into a fully green industrial paradigm. Our commitment is categorical. We are ready, prepared, and eager to do our part in full in setting global production and consumption on an ecologically sustainable path. Yet, we cannot and must not do this on our own. The Nairobi Declaration defines concrete roles for the global community as partners in this transformation. Global collective action is urgently required to transform the institutional architecture of international financial systems and mobilize the necessary capital that will forge the golden key of investment. The declaration therefore proposes a pathway towards a global climate financing charter by 2025. The Nairobi Declaration advocates the following specific measures. To begin with, new debt relief instruments and interventions to proactively manage debt default, principally through the extension of tenure of existing sovereign debt and the provision of a 10-year grace period. Additionally, the issuance of new special drawing rights dedicated to climate crisis response of similar magnitude and with similar urgency and resolve as the SDR provision for pandemic response 2 years ago, together with the scaling up of concessional financing by at least $500 billion. Further, the elimination of existing gross and irrational disparities in credit rating and risk analysis before 2025 to address the manifestly unfair situation where low-income countries pay up to 5 times more than their wealthier counterparts. The declaration proceeds to set out viable sources of resources required for effective climate action, which run to the order of trillions of dollars, by including a universal tax on fossil fuel trade, emission levies on aviation and maritime transport, and a global financial transaction tax. Finally, the declaration advocates for integrity in the international accounting systems that supports the proper valuation of mineral wealth, natural capital, and ecosystem services in the computation of national GDPs. Finally, neither Africa nor the developing world stands in need of charity, handouts, or harms from the developed countries. What we need is fairness, a fair financial system, fair market access for green assets, products, and services, fair national regional trade mechanisms which promote fair competition to facilitate efficient deployment of capital in locations offering the highest
comparative advantage for global decarbonization. Africa's inaugural climate summit has sent forth a message of hope to humanity that the industrial and socio-economic transformation of Africa and the developing countries is at the same time the surest pathway to effective, rapid implementation of climate action, decisive and affirmative response to the great existential threat of our time. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now I would like to give the floor to Her Excellency, Ms. Feame Naomi Mataafa, the Prime Minister of Samoa, to take the floor. SIDS, Prime Minister, have long championed 1.5 degrees loss and damage and the climate action agenda. Prime Minister, what are SIDS pushing to help close the gaps we face and to get us where we need to be?
Thank you. Secretary General and Your Excellencies, I am pleased to deliver this intervention as Chair of AOSIS on behalf of people inhabiting some of the most vulnerable regions in the world. I stand here for the people of Tuvalu and Kiribati, islands where communities have already been forced to relocate due to the rising seas. I stand here for the Marshall Islands, where residents are challenged to access safe drinking water due to saltwater intrusion. I stand here for Dominica, where Hurricane Maria cost $90 billion in damage. I stand here for the Maldives, where coastal erosion is threatening livelihoods. In short, I stand here to ensure that all people of small island developing states know that their voices are being heard on the world stage, and we will not stop fighting for their right to remain on the lands in which the legacies of their ancestors are rooted, the lands we have every obligation to protect. We endorse the Secretary General's acceleration agenda for climate action. For decades, AOSIS has been sounding the alarm on the devastating impacts of climate change and the need for countries to be accountable for their contribution to this crisis. As SIDS, our contribution to greenhouse gas emissions is less than 1%. The G20 is responsible for 80% of the emissions. The pursuit of profit over the well-being of humanity is not right. It is unjust. The synthesis report for the technical dialogue of the global stocktake underscores that emissions are not in line with the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal, and the window to up ambition and deliver on current promises is closing fast. We must work together on this. There is absolutely no time to waste. The world can peak emissions by 2025 through collective action. SIDS are not standing still, waiting for the world to change. However, we urgently need the support of the international community, particularly on the financial and technical fronts. SIDS are actively engaged in climate action to address the challenges posed by climate change and promote sustainability. For instance, Samoa is transitioning to clean, sustainable energy through the utilization of renewable energy sources. Dominica is committed to becoming the world's first climate resilient nation, investing in resilient infrastructure, reforestation, and geothermal energy projects. Palau has created one of the world's largest marine sanctuaries, the Palau National Marine Sanctuary. Cabo Verde has been developing wind and solar energy projects to reduce reliance on fossil fuels. Many small islands are leading the way in driving forward renewable energy initiatives, as well as making concerted adaptation efforts to combat erosion and sea level rise and address water and agricultural challenges. Colleagues, the time has come to truly commit to climate action. As we look ahead to COP28, AOSIS is reiterating our call to course correct and ratchet up ambition based on the latest science, particularly through outcomes of the Global Stocktake Process, Mitigation Work Programme, and the Global Goal on Adaptation Work Programme, and operationalize a loss and damage fund that is fit for purpose for particularly vulnerable countries, especially our small island developing states. Excellencies, make no mistake, the storm is gaining strength. It is our responsibility as leaders to secure a resilient and prosperous future for our people. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Excellency. I would now like to give the floor to Ms. Liddy Nakpil, coordinator of the Asian People's Movement on Debt and Development and a climate justice activist. Ms. Nakpil, you have emphasized the importance of ending fossil fuels quickly and fairly. How can we make this transition just and equitable?
Thank you. Thank you for the floor.
Would you turn on your microphone, please? It is counterintuitively red, everybody, when it's on.
Thank you so much. Last Sunday, we took part in the historic climate march here in New York, adding our voices to the urgent call for the end to fossil fuels. The march capped hundreds of similar actions that started in Asia last September 15, with thousands of people joining mobilizations in multiple locations in 12 Asian countries, followed by actions in the Pacific, Europe, Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean and North America. We call for the release of young climate activists arrested in Uganda in the peaceful protests. We are here to reiterate our call for all governments to take decisive, bold actions for a rapid, equitable transition out of fossil fuels directly to renewable energy systems with no loopholes, no exceptions, no false, unreliable solutions that merely extend the life of fossil fuels and serve as excuses to continue emitting greenhouse gases. The current commitments are nowhere near enough. We need new commitments and agreements, including an international treaty for the non-proliferation of fossil fuels and a global phase-out plan with clear timelines and fair sharing of actions to reach real zero by 2050. As we all know, the climate crisis has already claimed millions of lives, wreaked devastating impacts on our health, livelihoods, food and water systems, cost trillions of dollars in damages to crops, homes, and infrastructure, and triggered horrifying disasters such as super typhoons, unprecedented droughts, and raging wildfires. How much more pain, loss, and suffering will it take for everyone to do what is necessary? We urge governments to fulfill their duties and obligations to their people, to all of humanity, and we especially call on governments of the wealthiest countries who bear the biggest responsibilities for the climate crisis, whose commitments are the farthest away from their fair share of climate actions, and yet are fond of presenting themselves as climate champions. The fair share of these wealthiest countries includes meeting their full obligations to deliver climate finance. Climate finance is so absolutely vital, not only for adaptation, building resilience, and covering loss and damage. It is fundamental for equity and justice and fair sharing of efforts in the energy transition, without which this transition will not succeed. We, the people of the Global South, are not asking for aid or assistance. Climate finance is an obligation and part of reparations for historical and continuing harms and injustices. We have a right not just to survive, but to build a better home and future for our children. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Nakpil. And next, I would like to invite Her Excellency Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission. The EU is implementing its Green Deal. Is there anything more the EU can do to accelerate climate action, both at home and abroad?
Thank you very much. It's on. Now we have 70 days and then the world will meet in Dubai. Expectations increase as temperatures rise, so we have to become concrete. And I would like to speak about 3 topics: its ambitions, its targets, and its finance and investment. First, on ambition, we have to better protect our citizens, especially the most vulnerable ones, against the loss and damage that climate change brings. We need to agree on effective solutions still this year. The European Union will be a strong ally in those discussions. But at the same time, we should also show ambition in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So we should go faster in removing the root causes of climate change. The European Union has set ambitious emission reduction goals for 2030. We want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 55% at least. And the good news is we are on track to overshoot this goal already. But similar ambition is needed by other major emitters to ensure that global emissions peak by 2025 and unabated fossil fuels are phased out well before 2050. My second topic, targets. We have to propel the global clean energy transition. And therefore, together with COP28 President Sultan Al Jaber, with President Ruto of Kenya, Prime Minister Mia Mottley of Barbados, and others, we're building a global coalition so that by COP28, the whole world can agree on tripling renewable energy and doubling annual energy savings by 2030. We need these global goals because only what gets measured gets done. And finally, on finance and investment, more investment is needed, especially in developing countries with a huge potential for renewable energy, clean hydrogen, and critical raw materials. And that was also the message of the African Climate Summit you just heard President Ruto. Europe has heard this message. In the next 5 years alone, we will invest at least 4 billion euros in renewable energy and hydrogen in developing economies as part of our 300 billion euro Global Gateway plan. And this brings me to my last point, and this was just mentioned. We need to prompt investments before we meet in Dubai. We have to meet the $100 billion climate finance goal. Indeed, it is a question of trust. The European Union will contribute its fair share of $27 billion, as we did the last years. More is needed for finance. We want to support the establishment of green bond markets in the low and middle income countries. Europe strongly supports a reform of international financial system. And we will work with you, Secretary General, I heard you, and with interested countries to have at least 60% of global emissions covered by carbon pricing by 2030. Today, it's only 23% that are covered. And this brings revenue already of $95 billion. So just imagine we could cover 60% of global greenhouse gas emissions, the amount of revenues that we would get to invest in low and middle income countries. These proposals are concrete, they are realistic. Let's use the coming 70 days to turn them into reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I would now like to welcome His Excellency Pham Minh Chinh, Prime Minister of Vietnam. Prime Minister, Vietnam is at the forefront of those pioneering a just and equitable energy transition away from coal and towards renewables, not just to tackle the climate crisis, but also to accelerate. Please share with us the latest in Vietnam's efforts to achieve net zero by 2050.
Cảm ơn bà Chủ tịch. Thưa các quý vị.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Excellencies, climate change continues to be the greatest global challenge, directly affecting and causing severe damage to economic development, social welfare, and more directly to life and health of people. The rather of nature evident through harrowing heat waves, floods, and drought are warning, urging us to take stronger and more responsible actions to minimize the global warming rate. This challenge calls for us to take a global and a whole-of-people approach with breakthrough, holistic, comprehensive, and innovative solutions. Therefore, I think we must establish a new vision, new way of thinking, new resolve and resolute action for net zero green development. To realize this goal, we must accelerate just and green energy transition, placing the people at the center and as the owner and leaving no one behind. I call on developed countries, international organizations to lend active support to developing, less developed and least developed countries in green technology, green finance, green management, and human resources training, as well as in the building of the renewable energy industry, smart grids, among others. We must especially build next-generation partnerships and bolster green climate financing through public-private planning, in which public investment leads the way for private investment. Developed countries and international partners must double financing for adaptation by 2025 and operationalize the Loss and Damage Fund at COP28 as committed. This will help support developing countries to address climate change consequences. The global financial system should continue to be reformed comprehensively to strengthen its capability to provide green financing to help the world better cope with tremendous challenges of climate change. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, while still a developing country facing no small amount of challenges, in the spirit of action for green earth, Vietnam is determined to achieve its net zero commitment by 2050. Vietnam is among 30 countries to submit nationally determined contribution, NDC, and one of the 3 developing countries to participate in the ZP. With the companionship and full support of the international community, we can strive to rapidly cut greenhouse gas emission down to 43.5% by 2030 and generate 70% of its energy through renewables by 2050. Vietnam is working actively with international partners to develop a resource mobilization plan for ZP to be announced at COP28. It's our hope that this collaboration will become model to promote global just energy transition for a green future for all humankind. Let us foster awareness, jointly, decisively act, and share in the responsibility. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Next, I would like to give the floor to His Excellency Olaf Scholz, Chancellor of Germany. Chancellor, Germany has made significant strides in accelerating mitigation efforts with commitments like achieving net zero emissions by 2045 and phasing out coal ideally by 2030 or at the latest by 2038 by law. Considering this ambitious agenda, how does Germany plan to accelerate decarbonization in emission-intensive sectors?
Thank you. Excellencies, colleagues, 2023 could become a decisive moment in our fight against climate change. On the one hand, this year is set to go down in the statistics and as the hottest ever recorded to date. On the other hand, 2023 also has the potential to become a turning point with regard to climate action. There are three developments in particular that can give us hope and spur us on to be even more ambitious. First, we are turning words into deeds. As a country, we honored our pledge to provide at least 6 billion euro international climate financing. We did this 3 years earlier than previously allowed in 2022 instead of 25. And recent estimates make me confident that the industrialized countries will reach the $100 billion climate finance commitment for the first time this year. To move us even closer to that target, Germany is hosting the Green Climate Fund Replenishment Conference in Bonn this October. Germany plans to contribute 2 billion euro, an increase of 500 million euro compared to the last replenishment. Solid financial commitments are the necessary basis for making decisive progress at COP28. But in Dubai, it will take the strong resolution of us all to phase out fossil fuels, first and foremost coal. Germany's own phase out by 2038, ideally by 2030, is firmly anchored in our law. As a result of the global stocktake in Dubai, we should also agree on clear targets for the expansion of renewable energies and for energy efficiency by 2030. And here lies a second reason for being hopeful. At our recent summit in Delhi, the G20 agreed to triple renewable energy capacity by 2030. Coming from those who are producing roughly 80% of global emissions, this is a remarkable step forward. Domestically, we are on track to produce 80% of our electricity from renewables by 2030. Our goal is climate neutrality by 2045. Factoring in the impact of carbon sinks, we are projecting to cut our emissions by at least 88% in 2040 already. In Dubai, we will also be able to celebrate the launch of the International Climate Club, and that's a third reason why 2023 could mark a turning point. The club currently has 27 members and it keeps growing. As one of the co-chairs, together with our friends from Chile, I would like to invite all of you who share our ambition to speed up the decarbonization of our industrial sectors to join the club. Its goal is simple. We will join hands to develop a framework for green growth, a framework that makes decarbonized industrial production our business model. Ladies and gentlemen, man-made climate change is without a doubt the greatest global challenge of our times. Our ambition to make 23 a turning point for climate action should be even greater. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And I would now like to ask His Excellency Cyril Ramaphosa, President of South Africa, to take the floor. Sir, South Africa's approach to addressing climate change involves a just transition and a society-wide commitment to both mitigation and adaptation. How does South Africa plan to leverage its unique position and experience in implementing a just transition?
Thank you. Secretary General of the United Nations, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have witnessed with increasing alarm the effects of climate change, environmental degradation, and unsustainable production and resource scarcity on human health and well-being. As countries across the world seek practical ways to build back better from the COVID-19 pandemic and multiple crises, we are presented with a unique and unprecedented opportunity to set the global economy on a more equitable, environmentally sustainable, and low-carbon developmental path. Despite having little responsibility for causing climate warming, Africa is warming faster than the rest of the world. Like other parts of the global south, the continent is significantly affected by climate change. As such, climate actions cannot be separated from the drive for sustainable and inclusive development. The signs that we see sends a clear message that the world is not on track to meet the goals contained in the Paris Agreement. This Climate Ambition Summit must therefore instill the necessary urgency and propel the actions that we all need to take to prevent the destruction of our planet. Developed economic countries in particular must act with urgency to accelerate the reduction of emissions and fulfill their obligations and honor past promises. Earlier this month, there was a summit that was held in Nairobi, which resulted in the call to action. To achieve the vision that was set out of economic transformation, African leaders have called on the international community to support efforts to massively increase Africa's renewable energy capacity by 2030. They are seeking, as leaders, investment in smart, efficient green technologies. They have called for support to strengthen actions to halt and reverse biodiversity loss, deforestation, as well as desertification. Structural reform is needed to promote transitions that are just and inclusive. Mechanisms must enable products from Africa to compete on a fair and equitable basis. And the multilateral financial system must build resilience to climate shocks and better leverage the balance sheet of multilateral development banks to scale up concessional finance and other forms of creative financing mechanisms. The system needs to provide interventions for debt management and relief to prevent debt default. Financing for climate action should respect the right of all countries to pursue their own developmental pathways. As South Africa implements its ambitious, nationally determined contribution, which is aligned to the Paris Agreement temperature goals, we see new opportunities for green growth and development. With abundant solar and wind resources, with significant resources of critical minerals, South Africa is positioning itself to be a leader in renewable energy, green hydrogen, and sustainable industrialization. Due to regulatory changes and the surge of investment, South Africa has confirmed a pipeline of renewable energy projects that are expected to produce in excess of 10 gigawatts of electricity. South Africa has established a just transition framework to ensure that climate actions adhere to the principles of procedural, restorative, and distributive justice. We are committed to building resilience to the impact of climate change and reducing our emissions in ways that are appropriate to our national circumstances. As South Africa and as the African continent, we are working to give substance to our assertion that no country should ever have to choose between developmental aspirations and climate action. This summit must therefore demonstrate that the leaders of the world are committed to ambitious climate actions that are inclusive, comprehensive, and in the end that they should leave no one behind. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency, and I would now like to invite Mr. Gavin Newsom, the California governor, to take the floor. Sir, California now has a 2045 net zero date in law, a credible transition plan to get there, and now a landmark lawsuit against some of the world's largest fossil fuel companies. Governor, please tell us more of the bold actions and policies that are needed and will be taken to deliver on California's climate plan.
Secretary, thank you, Secretary General. Thank you all for the privilege of this opportunity. And the spirit of this convening around movers and doers, I come from a state of dreamers and doers, a state that has long prided itself on being on the leading and cutting edge. We love to say about California, the future happens there first. We are America's coming attraction. Unsurprisingly, it was 1945 where the United Nations Charter was founded in the great state of California. I say that again as a point of pride and a point of consideration as it relates to the issue that brings us here today. It was just 22 years later, in 1967, when then conservative governor Ronald Reagan began the process of leading the modern American environmental movement with the creation of the California Air Resources Board and the first regulations of tailpipe emissions in America. Richard Nixon himself codified that effort in 1970 with the Clean Air Act. California continued to lead by example in the 70s with energy efficiency. We led with the first fully functioning cap-and-trade program in the United States. We continue to lead as it relates to efforts to completely transition to 100% zero-emission vehicles, the first state in America to establish a firm goal. And we also have established the most comprehensive plan to implement, we call it the Great Implementation, our ambitious goals and advance our low-carbon green growth future. I say all of that very mindful that if you read the newspaper or turn on your TV, that you see a state, not just of dreamers or doers, but you see a state that's burning up, a state that's choking up, a state that's heating up with wildfires and floods and droughts, places, lifestyles, and traditions being destroyed right in front of our eyes, despite all of that leadership, despite that ambition. So I'm here with humility and gratitude to all of you, but particularly you, Mr. Secretary General, for your clarity, because I think it's time for us to be a lot more clear. This climate crisis is a fossil fuel crisis. This climate crisis persists. It's not complicated. It's not complicated. It's the burning of oil. It's the burning of gas. It's the burning of coal. And we need to call that out. For decades and decades, the oil industry has been playing each and every one of us in this room for fools. They've been buying off politicians. They've been denying and delaying science and fundamental information that they were privy to, that they didn't share or they manipulated. Their deceit and denial going back decades has created the conditions that persist here today. And so thank you, Madam Undersecretary, for recognizing California's effort to join the efforts of others to be more clear and concise in terms of what we're up against and our responsibility to do more and be more. And I say all of that in closing with a spirit not of a closed fist, but of an open hand and an appreciation that we are all in this together and mindful that all of us have unique circumstances, all of us have unique traditions, all of us have unique challenges. And I just offer this, Mr. Secretary General, again, gratitude to you, not just for your position, formal authority, but exercising your moral authority and sharing your voice and your action and passion on clarifying what we're up against. And I thank each and every one of you for the privilege of this time.
Thank you, Governor. I would now like to invite His Excellency Pushpa Kamal Dahal Prachanda, Prime Minister of Nepal, to take the floor. Sir, the least developed countries are some of the most vulnerable to ever-increasing climate impacts around the world, while the least responsible. What are some of the priorities for the LDCs to tackle the climate crisis, and how is Nepal itself aligning with the Secretary General's acceleration agenda, including on its net zero target?
Madam Chair, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, I thank you, Madam Chair, for turning me the floor. Let me first respond to you as the LDC Bureau Chair, highlighting some important issues from my full statement submitted for records. As the most vulnerable countries, LDCs have been bearing the brunt of climate change, despite accounting for only 3.3% of greenhouse gas emission. For LDCs to tackle climate crisis, first, we call for effective implementation of Doha program backed with adequate resource and technology as it comprehensively addresses climate change, environmental degradation, and recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, putting resilience and risk-informed development at the core. I thank you for prioritizing LDCs in the early warning initiative. Second, I join you call to double adaptation finance by 2025 and urge for devoting half of climate finance to adaptation. Third, we urge for the fulfillment of 100 billion climate finance commitment, replenishment of Green Climate Fund, and operationalization of loss and damage fund with simple and easy access procedure for LDCs. Fourth, we commend your initiative and effort for a just transition, urging for enhanced support and investment to meet SDG 7 in LDC, as 48% their population lack access to electricity. And fifth, the global stock take during COP28 must be a moment of critical course correction to keep alive 1.5 degree target. We are facing frequent and highly damaging climate disaster. Despite challenges, Nepal is committed to the Paris Agreement and to our national goal to reach net zero by 2045. To this end, we have already submitted an updated NDC and aligned our national policies and plans within it. Recently, my government has approved a detailed NDC implementation strategy to achieve target across sectors. Let me share some critical progress. In 2020, we set a target to maintain 45% of our territory under forest cover by 2030. We have already achieved this target with our forest coverage now standing just over 45%. Against our target of clean energy generation from 1,400 megawatts to 15,000 megawatts by 2030, we have already reached nearly 3,000 megawatts, and with ongoing hydro and solar projects, we are well on track to achieve the target. Our efforts to promote electric vehicles are progressing well. Recently, we have added over 50 charging stations, and we are installing additional 500 charging stations, and shortly, mostly for public vehicles. We pursue locally led adaptation approach and involve local communities, indigenous people, women, and young people in climate actions. Our top priorities include promoting a green and resilient economy. We are pleased to be part of your adaptation pipeline accelerator and early warning initiative and assure my government's full support and commitment to them. To conclude, let us ensure that this summit and COP28 become true turning point in our fight against climate crisis. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. As the Secretary General noted, he will have to leave for a time to attend the Security Council meeting on Ukraine, which he is required to attend. The Deputy Secretary General, Her Excellency Amina Mohammed, will take his place in the meantime. I would now like to give the floor to His Excellency Srettha Thavisin, Prime Minister of Thailand. Mr. Prime Minister, you are newly elected, but have already expressed your vision on how Thailand could tackle the climate crisis with international support and collaboration. Could you please share with us this vision for Thailand to tackle climate change and build the climate resiliency for your country?
Madam Deputy Secretary General, Excellencies, I recently met with Thai farmers and learned of the devastating impacts of climate change on their livelihood. Now we need to accelerate our action. Thailand applauds the Secretary General's acceleration agenda in bringing forward net zero timeline closer to 2050, making energy transition including coal phase out by 2040, and updating NDC for 2025 with absolute emissions cuts. Thailand shares the same aspirations and will work with all stakeholders to enhance technology development, financial resources, and capacity building. At COP26, we pledged to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. We have also raised our NDC's goal from 20% to 40% by 2030. We have been working tirelessly to transform this pledge into concrete action, as evidenced in our long-term low greenhouse gas emissions development strategy. We have realigned our national energy plan, shifting the focus to energy efficiency, making a change in the transport sector, increasing EVs production, and preparing to phase out coal-generated power. With the concept of sustainable agronomy, we have transformed our agricultural practices to lower emission. Pilot projects have been proven successful and are ready to be scaled up. This has reduced climate change vulnerability and enhanced farmers' well-being nationwide. Since taking office, my government wasted no time in implementing a plan to increase the share of renewable energy, implementing utility green tariff program, support the usage of solar roof and net metering to incentivize the production of clean energy. Thailand is determined to increase green area to cover 55% of total land area by 2037. We are proactively adopting green finance mechanism. We have raised $12.5 billion through the issuance of sustainability bond to fund multiple sustainability projects. Soon, we will issue sustainability-linked bonds to stimulate the growth of green bond market, ensuring organizations are incentivized to achieve SDGs. Climate change is a top priority for my administration. We have established the Department of Climate Change and Environment to respond to the adverse effects of climate change. And to implement our commitments, soon we will pass the Climate Change Act to regulate mandatory greenhouse gas emissions. Thailand is doing our utmost to overcome this crisis. In partnering with all our friends, I insist that the time to act is now. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I would now like to give the floor to His Excellency Klaus Iohannis, President of Romania. Romania has taken noteworthy steps to align with the Secretary General's acceleration agenda, including on coal phase-out. Could you please share with us how else Romania is seeking to accelerate its economy-wide transition for a 1.5-degree future? You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair.
Heads of state and government, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, since 1990, Romania reduced its greenhouse gas emissions by more than 2/3 while multiplying its GDP. Currently, Romania has one of the lowest levels of such emissions per capita in the European Union. We firmly pledge to further accelerate reaching the net zero target. Romania will phase out coal by 2030 and bring into eco-compliance coal mining sites by 2032. €2 billion were recently committed nationally to renewable energy generation, storage and transport, as well as energy efficiency through the REPower EU instrument. Romania is home to some of the largest European training centers for renewable energy technicians, including from developing countries. Romania is also an increasingly attractive host to solar panels and batteries manufacturing. My diplomatic engagements with Latin American leaders this spring enhanced our dialogue on circular economy and in approaching the green transition. Fellow leaders, we witnessed the intensification of the devastating impact of climate change. We need to do more to protect vulnerable states and communities. The environment and climate change will constitute a priority for Romania's official development assistance for the next 4 years. Romania has built in recent years a network of international partnerships on emergency situations and disaster response, contributing to the consolidation of early warning systems. Over the next period, we will expand this network with more countries from Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. Romania also works towards adapting agriculture to climate change and for improving access to food worldwide. Given our successful record in Malawi and Tanzania, we aim at expanding such programs, especially to African countries, in the next 2 years. Ladies and gentlemen, climate change knows no national boundary, and no country or citizen is sheltered from its impact. Let's be clear. We need to be brave in our decisions and actions. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I would now like to invite His Excellency Gabriel Boric, President of Chile, to share with us the steps that Chile is taking to accelerate implementation to ensure that you reach net zero by 2050 through a just transition.
Muchísimas gracias.
Many thanks indeed. First of all, the first thought that comes to mind as I listen to the